Alright, so, you're already looking at the thumbnail and the title and you're probably thinking, oh, he's just gonna say his favorite character. No. I think you guys know me well enough to where I wouldn't say something if I didn't mean it. Hopefully. Either way, maybe this won't come as a shock depending on how far or how long you've been playing the game for, and maybe it will depending on perspectives and all that junk. I should preface this by saying, as usual, it's an opinion, which means that if it's incorrect or objectively wrong, you can burn me at the stake. But yeah, in my opinion, the best aged Gen 1 unit is Sonia, or Zephyr, depending on perspective. Let's start with Sonia first though. Sonia has a quick impulse to Wu Dao tone, which in and of itself is already a pretty strong effect, but when you combine it with her already pretty good stat line, especially on top of her Resplendent, she can actually do a pretty fair amount of work. In my opinion, one of the best places you could use her is probably going to be on Aetherite's defense. Preferably on Dark Season because Element exists, meaning that her entire gimmick is just going to get shut down with, turn 1, false start nonsense, yada yada yada, which is probably a point towards Zephyr, but I'll go into his issues in a bit. Either way, you put her on Dark Defense, you give her a Catria Ball, or whatever the case may be, or you could even be a Cordelia Ball, whichever you like more. You give her Special Spiral 4, which she can loop really easily and doesn't need a lot of outside support to get going, and you have yourself one really hard-hitting unit who could pierce through stuff like Hardy Fighter, unless they decide for some reason to run Hardy Fighter 2, in which case, well, you can't really go through that because, yeah, it's on the second hit. Whoop-de-doo. But you're not really going to fight that on most scenarios. Regardless, with her stat line, infantry benefits, and skill accessibility, she's actually one of the stronger Aetherite's defense units that we still currently have in the game. And all of it's partially due to the fact that she also just has a really good stat line. And you could definitely argue that maybe someone with a Slaying Tome and extra attack over Sonia is probably going to do a bit better, but I do think with the extra 10 damage that she gets from her weapon, that it is cutting it very close in her favor. Also, not to mention that she can have a free C slot for whatever she wants because she doesn't even have to run Times Pulse or even Quick Impulse or even external support for extra damage or just to get the extra charge out. I think it's a pretty solid benefit in her favor. Not to mention that her color is also just really favorable right now. We don't have a lot of red far saves currently, and that isn't to say you're never going to run into a red far save, but considering a lot of ranged threats currently, you're more than likely going to run into far saves that are either blue or colorless, especially since Duochrom's a thing, and he can just shred through a lot of stuff like that. So even being red may not necessarily be safe because it's just neutral matchups. Because of that, I do think being green is actually pretty beneficial in her favor currently. And that could easily swing the moment we get something like a really meta-defining red far save. Maybe against the likes of Duo Duma, but they'd have to be way more commonplace, where Chrom is just universally applicable in so many more situations. And that's Sonia. On the other spectrum, we have Zephyr, who is an armor, meaning that he's already one of the best Gen 1 units or Book 1 units in the game because armors cheat. However, as previously aforementioned, he does have his own counters, and that falls in line with the likes of Emblem, who is going to be a mainstay going forward because she's just absurdly strong and dumb. And because of that, I find that he has just as much flexibility as Sonia, where Sonia can't be used on Anima defense all too well, Zephyr can't really be used on Light Season as well. Although, of course, this will ultimately vary, but that just goes into, like, all sorts of, like, nuance and complications. But generally speaking, they both only function pretty well on, like, one specific season. Although, Zephyr, again, you could use them on maybe something like a Dark Defense or even an Anima Defense, but that also goes into another whole thing of, like, oh, Hardy Fighter and yada yada. Regardless, Zephyr being an armor is pretty beneficial, regardless of Emblem being Emblem. Not to mention that he has access to a fair amount of swords. Ever since we got stuff like Arcane Sword, and I'm not going to pronounce the name because it's stupidly difficult, I've only seen him go on the rise, and swords that followed after were just even better. Well, okay, not even better, but they're really good side grades, including the Wyvern Katana, which, again, if you know me by now, I'm a huge advocate of Dual Phase Brave because I do think it's a really strong effect. And given that it does grant defense and res, and even with the 8 might penalty, it still does give him an edge over stuff like Arden, even if Arden does hit a bit harder, Zephyr is going to be a much stronger general tank because he has much more res to work with. And it's not even like 4 or 5 res, it's a pretty considerable amount of res when you think about it. And you could always argue that maybe you just drop Arden's Blade for Wyvern Katana, but then he's just generic like Zephyr. And I'd still use Zephyr because he still has more res. And even then, you could still boost it maybe with like skills like close defense or whatever. But comparatively, I find that Zephyr is just going to be a way stronger near save tank. And if you wanted to use him for far save purposes, well, you have the Arcane. And again, stat-wise, he's still going to be doing a lot better than a lot of the other Book 1 accessible swords and all that stuff, which is really beneficial. You could also argue maybe something like Black Knight with Special Spiral 4 or Special Fighter 4, but I don't think he has enough bulk to make it work, especially with more modern threats being heavier hitting. I find that your best bet when it comes to a general near or far save tank is going to be Zephyr. The other issue comparatively to the two is that while Zephyr and Arden could always just fall back on maybe something like a guaranteed follow-up, since Black Knight will more than likely be using something like Special Spiral or Special Fighter 4 if that's the niche you really want to go down, then he's going to have to speed stack comparatively. And you can still do that since his weapon does grant 4, and he does have considerably good speed to work with. But I do think if you're splitting up all of your stats into stacking attack, speed, and defense, you're going to have to make some cuts somewhere, and more often than not, if you're going to do that, you're probably going to try and stack up your speed and defense over your attack. And maybe that'll work out, especially since you have Black Luna, but if you do miss the initial first one-hit KO, especially against stuff such as, I don't know, Brave Seleth, who has stupidly high amounts of speed, alongside Lull, and his Air to Light, which grants no follow-up, then it might be an uphill battle comparatively. And he is everywhere. So if you are planning to act like a near save unit, you're going to have to account for him. So if it does boil down to a speed check, there's a good possibility he's just not going to make it. Although, of course, you could probably work around it maybe with stuff like Close Defense 4, which will neutralize his visible bonuses. You could, well, you can't speed stack because he's more than likely going to have lull, but you could run attack speed near save, and then you could just continually go from there. But if you are dumping all that stats into your speed, you would want to set aside something for your defense. Because if you're eating too many hits on the physical side, there's a good chance he's going to go down anyway. But at the end of the day, that's really just going to boil down to play style, what you're really looking for in a unit. Still, even with that being the case, I find that these are going to be the best aged Book 1 units in the game currently. This could always swing the moment we get any new inheritable skill or sword or any weapon or whatever the case may be, because that's what happened to Zephyr, that's what happened to so many units in the game. We got one inheritable skill, and bam, they're stupidly good now. You know, near saves basically fixing every armor ever, or even far saves. Either way, you'll have to let me know what you think down below. Do you think there are better Book 1 units overall? Which Book 1 unit do you still use to this day? Because I'm sure there are plenty of people that still use their favorites, so I am curious on how you deck them out, or what you even use with them, and how it goes for you. You'll have to let me know down below, and if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I'll see you later.